Welcome to this edition of Capital Dateline, the award-winning statewide public affairs show, reaching 6.4 million cable households on Fox Sports Sun. Capital Dateline brings you interviews with Florida's leaders, whose decisions and opinions touch your life every day, from the governor and legislative movers and shakers to the media and public educators. And now the cable industry of Florida and the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association are pleased to bring you Capital Dateline.
Welcome to Capital Dateline, brought to you by Florida's internet and television industry, which employs over 100,000 men and women working around the clock to bring Florida the best television and high-speed internet, serving over 6 million Floridians. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We're coming to you from our headquarters located just a few blocks from Florida's capital. In this edition of our show, we'll sit down with Jim Saunders, executive editor of the News Service of Florida, and we'll take a look ahead at the upcoming 2017 Florida legislative session. We'll then take you to Enterprise Florida's most recent meeting, where we caught up with Governor Scott, talking about the new CEO, Chris Hart. We also caught up with Commissioner Adam Putnam, talking about Florida's distillers and brewers using Florida crops to make their products. We also caught up with Enterprise Florida's new leader, Chris Hart, talking about what his first tasks will be and many more. In our first segment, we will look ahead to how Floridians' tax dollars are likely to be spent during the upcoming session and what issues will likely be addressed by the legislature. Our guest will be Jim Saunders, executive editor of the News Service of Florida. His organization covers state government news in the capital and across Florida. His work is featured in Florida's major newspapers and newspaper outlets. We now go to the studios of the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association and our interview with Jim Saunders. Welcome. Here we are, Jim, once again in 2017. We're looking at the legislative session, and we're going to look at the budget. And how are we going to spend the citizens of Florida's tax dollars this year?
Well, the budget this year, current year, is about $82 billion, but that's a huge number. Huge number.
What can't we do with $82 billion?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's that question. But I think the budget and negotiations on the budget are going to be probably one of the biggest issues of the legislative session. The revenues are going up, but they're not going up as much as the legislature would like and Governor Scott would probably like. And you got expenses going up at the same time. Mm-hmm. The bottom line, when you sort through it all, they're not going to have a lot of extra money during this upcoming session to pay for new things. Right. House Speaker Richard Corcoran and Senate President Joe Negron have differing views on how to spend money, but I think they agree that if they're going to spend a bunch of money, they're going to need to find other places to cut, and that's where it becomes difficult.
All right, so if we look at spending money, you've only got so much in your bucket, in the citizens of Florida's bucket. Both the Speaker and the President have been talking about higher ed. What do they want to spend money on in higher ed and how much?
Well, it's really been a priority of the Senate President Joe Negron, who has even before, months ago, he started touring university campuses and making a big push to increase funding on particularly the university system. Mm-hmm. But he's talking about $1 billion over 2 years of increased funding. To do that, though, he acknowledges he's going to have to find other places in the budget to cut to free up money. His position is that you got an $80 billion plus budget. Even if you just take 5% of that, $4 billion you can move around places. It's not quite that simple, but he seems to think that there are places he can find to cut elsewhere to help fund that higher education budget. But he's talking about a lot of money, and for that, there's also issues in the pre-K-12 system for funding that are going to be very prominent, partly because the legislature last year allocated some state money to avoid raising local property taxes for schools.
Well, that sounds like a good thing.
It was a very popular move because people don't want their property taxes raised, right. But it's a recurring expense. Okay. So they're back this year looking at either allocating that same state money or having to let the locals raise their property taxes. So we're talking $400 million just in that pot right there. So education is going to be probably a very prominent part of these budget discussions through the 2017 session.
Well, so if we're talking about offsetting property taxes. I mean, that just calls into everyone's perspective that the budget discussions and talk, it's not this aloof concept that's happening in Tallahassee. That affects every household in Florida. What else are we looking at, possibly from the governor's side in his priorities, Governor Scott, that what is he looking for out of the budget process right now?
Well, each year the governor proposes a budget that the legislature then uses sort of as a starting point for their negotiations. And some of the early things that he has talked about are he wants to give a pay raise to state law enforcement officers, people like highway patrol officers and fish and wildlife officers, those sorts of folks. Not your local sheriff's deputy or police officer, but the state guys and gals. And he's talking about a 5% increase, which is about nearly $12 million. Again, $82 billion budget, that's not really that much money. But if negotiations start, that is a chunk of money, something new.
I mean, you compare $12 million against an $82 billion budget, and you think, where's the harm? But this always becomes a chip in the grander game of trade-offs.
That's the other thing is that the governor's going to have some priorities, legislature's going to have some priorities. So it becomes part of the game.
Well, let me take us to economic development funding, because that's a very broad spectrum right now in Florida government. And the two key areas, we'll say 2.5 is Enterprise Florida and all its subsidiaries across the state, and then you've got Visit Florida, which has been under fire in the last couple of months. We saw last year Will Seckham left the organization. So where do those numbers stand right now as a standard ask of the legislature to fund it? And what do we think the prognosis is for those being funded?
Well, the governor has made those organizations you'd refer to a priority. I mean, it's been for a while. He wants to spend about $85 million with Enterprise Florida in the coming year to business recruitment. He also wants to spend, I believe it's around $75 million, maybe a little bit more than that, with Visit Florida for tourism promotion. The difficulty with this issue is that the House leadership, particularly House Speaker Richard Corcoran, do not want to spend this money. They don't see value in these programs. Corcoran has made clear that he views it as corporate welfare. So there is going to be some banging of heads about these issues. If I had to be a betting man at this point, I would think that Enterprise Florida is going to have a really difficult time getting money. Not so sure about Visit Florida. But this has even trickled down to Space Florida, which is again a public-private agency that does space-related economic development. There's some concern at Space Florida about whether they can get money from the state because of this discussion about whether the state should be funding those types of programs.
Well, and you would think in economic development world, these have been not sacred cows, shall we say, but these are kind of, they've been perceived as perfunctory. Like, of course you're going to fund economic development. It's the world we live in. But the world has changed, and now you're seeing a new speaker coming in and saying, do we really need to do this in the modern day and age? And it's a question nobody has really asked for, should we do it at all? It's always been, well, how much and what's the story? And so that's a perspective that's changed, right?
Well, and I think that Visit Florida has had some problems. There was a very controversial contract with a rapper. They had Pitbull, and so that's caused
Mr. 305.
That's caused some problems for them. And I do think that tourism funding and space industry funding are maybe a little bit easier sell than these broader economic development programs that Enterprise Florida oversees. Right. Tourism industry is, obviously one of the main cogs of the whole economy in Florida.
A third of the economy.
I mean, space is not that big of a part of the economy, but in parts of the state, particularly over Brevard County, those areas, they provide a lot of good paying jobs, and something the governor has gone to repeatedly over there to try to get aerospace industry.
And frankly, the space program is global in nature when it does something significant. So it's free advertising, if you will, when they do something, but for what we spend for it.
Well, there's a whole lot of engineers over there making good money.
That's very true. That's very true.
And I think the governor would like to attract more engineers over there making good money.
Engineers definitely make above your
your standard wage. Okay, so let's talk about some of the fights that are going to happen in the legislature that steal oxygen away from these very deliberative discussions of budget. The oxygen stealers are going to be, what's number one?
Well, one of them, it's a very difficult, complex issue, is workers' compensation insurance. Couple Supreme Court rulings earlier this year found parts of the workers' comp system unconstitutional.
So business owners in the state are going to pay how much more?
Well, as of December 1st, rates started going up 14.5%. That trickles throughout the year as they renew and get new policies and so on. But as of December 1st, the rates started going up 14.5%.
Right.
Businesses have enjoyed about a dozen years of rates being lower than they had been in the past. So
we expect a classic matchup there between the business community and...
We got business community, we got
advocates.
trial bar, we have labor unions, we're probably going to have some healthcare providers involved in that. I mean, it's when that issue gets opened up every 10 or 12 years, lobbyists come running, and we're already seeing that, and there's a lot of components to that program that go beyond these Supreme Court rulings.
All right, well, let's go rapid fire in the last few minutes we've got. We've got a few more issues that are definitely going to make some headlines. What are they going to be?
Well, one of which I think we're already seeing is guns.
Right.
The Senate has blocked some major gun legislation over the past couple of years. It looks like it might have chance. This includes allowing people with concealed weapons licenses to carry on university and college campuses, allowing them to openly carry handguns in public. It looks like the Senate might be more amenable to those issues during this coming session than they have been in the past, but you can expect that to be a noisy debate.
All right. So we've got about a minute left, and what are the other two or three that people need to pay attention to?
Legislature is going to have to implement the medical marijuana constitutional amendment. There's a lot of entities fighting or gearing up on that issue because there's a lot of money involved. Those are a couple of those that I think we're looking at.
And then gambling.
Gambling is another big one because the Seminole Compact, agreement with the Seminole tribe, the governor's office is trying to negotiate a new gambling deal. And but that brings in the pari-mutuels. Again, this is a heavily lobbied issue. Always been hard to pass gambling legislation in Florida.
Well, we'll see how all of these issues shake up in the coming months as the legislative session approaches. Jim, thanks so much for your partnership with the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association and Capital Dateline. We know you keep us and you keep your readers informed as to what's going on.
Well, we appreciate it too.
Thank you very much.